let's go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. And welcome to today's online event called Exploring the Universe of Test Automation. All right, so before we get started, as usual, I'd like to go over a few notes how to participate on today's session. As usual, the duration of this session will be around 1 hour. The speakers will be presenting 45 to 50 minutes, followed by Q&A sessions, 10 to 15 minutes. And if you have any questions to our speakers, we ask you to please address it through the chat anytime during this presentation, or wait till the end of the quick Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and our speakers will try to answer as many questions during this event. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that today's presentation will be recorded and we'll be posting all recordings to our YouTube channel. So for those who couldn't join the call, or anyone who wants to re-watch the session and make notes from the presentation, you can do it so in our YouTube channel. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers for this session. Michael Piciulo, David Lowe, and Brian Stone. They serve as a lead quality engineer for software consulting services team at Worldwide Technology. Michael and David are the lead quality engineers, and Brian is software engineer in test. And together they have consulted for multiple Fortune 500 companies and experience in the test automation, creation, and execution, implementing test automation into continuous delivery, and implementing test maintenance strategies, and have created large test suites that incorporate multiple user personas and multiple test environments. They are very well experienced. Combined, they have more than 25 years of experience with functional and API test automation, and addition to the load testing, database testing, mobile testing, and application integration testing. So please forgive me if I miss anything, Michael, Dave, and Brian. So really excited to have you guys here. And without any further ado, Michael, why don't you go ahead and take it away from here?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Just give me one moment. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All right, so thank you, Houston SQEG Group, and everyone else attending. My name is Michael Piciulo again, David Lowe, and Brian Stone, and we're going to split time here about 15 minutes each, helping you understand the universe of test automation. Today, we're going to go into a few different things. So why test automation? And most of you probably know some of the benefits of test automation, but we'll go into those benefits more in depth, and also help you as QEs sell your management on test automation if you're struggling to do so. And that's something we commonly hear. How do you address upper management or C-level executives with the benefits of test automation? Also, we'll get in depth into the different types of test automation tools as we see them, and give you some examples, and then give you an approach, our holistic approach to test automation. Just a couple of fun facts about ourselves. I did a study abroad in Italy during college for a semester and got to visit 10 different European countries during that time. Brian's claim to fame is that he owns 10 mechanical keyboards. I would think most of us maybe own 1 or 2, maybe 4 max. And David started out testing Bejeweled when he started his career. Okay. So I will give you a quick intro on WWT. So we got the introduction earlier that mentioned we do software consulting services, in addition to a lot of other services we have that you can explore on WWT.com, our website. With regards to software test automation specifically, this is something that we've been doing for over 20 years. We've done it from the consulting side more over the last few years in terms of direct consulting and teaching and mentoring QAs how to do test automation. But even with our app development and delivery projects, test automation is something that we've implemented on almost all of our projects over the last 20 years. And here you can see just a few of the many clients we've worked with over that time frame. Quality engineering at WWT, we realize that there's no one right way to approach QE, but some of the main things we've learned over the last 20 years is that fast feedback is very important, and closing that feedback loop when it comes to defects, and we'll explain that more in greater detail later in the presentation. And testing as an afterthought robs a team of value. So testing early and testing often is something that we ingrain into all of our projects. At WWT, we make sure our testers are working hand in hand with our developers, that they're not just throwing code over the shelf, but that we're pairing with our developers on a daily basis. We want to make sure that, like I just mentioned, testing is something that we're doing very early in the process. So we have our QEs even working with our designers and our POs and BAs early in the process to help train our QEs on the requirements and help them, create test cases successfully and understand, how they can be testing this and their approach to testing, and even offer suggestions for the user experience. So we're always looking out for the user experience throughout our process and in our QE roles. And we also like to, say that quality is really everyone's responsibility. It's not just a QE, it's a developer, it's the designer, it's the PO, it's really everyone involved. So where we're going now and in the future is using test automation as an enabler with regards to quality, and making sure that we're not just implementing test automation, but we're implementing test automation in the right way that creates the greatest amount of value. And we'll go into more detail with that in our unique approach to test automation later in the presentation. Okay. So what does test automation look like? This is a project that we did for Papa John's, and you can see here that we had a suite of tests going on multiple mobile devices, tablets, iOS, Android, different OSs. And this test automation suite kicked off every time that we committed to master. So you can see this board in our office in downtown St. Louis. And this is just an example of one of the creative projects we did around test automation. But going through this and covering all the different phones and OSs allowed us to, basically run through, several dozen, if not, 100 or more tests multiple times, a day to check for early regressions and close that feedback loop, so that, the feedback time between noticing a defect after committing the code is significantly shortened, that we don't even let a day or half a day go by without knowing if we have a defect or not. At WWT, we like to say that we are tool agnostic, first of all, and that means that we're not a vendor for one specific test automation tool, but that we're familiar with many of the popular tools across the software industry. And we also do different types of tools, whether they're something code-based like Cypress, or a click and record tool, or even an AI-based tool. We're familiar with many of the popular tools, and we can also learn and adapt to others quickly. We do automation for different types of applications. So web, mobile, desktop apps, API. We also work with homegrown applications or commercial off the shelf. And we're also adaptable. So we want to make sure that with our clients, we're using the right tools for the client's application and environment. So when we talk about test automation, I think, like I said, a lot of us probably understand what test automation is. Maybe we've used it on projects or at least spiked with it, or we have a general understanding of its benefits. But this is something we put together for clients because often we run into QEs who are just struggling to sell test automation to their management or executives, or we have someone like a QA director or VP of app development who comes to us and says, we want to do automation, but I need that big sign off and I need help selling our CFO or CEO, on that contract. And so we feel like there's value for the group because even a conference that I spoke at and with Yusuf in October in California at Star West, I ran into many QEs who really wanted to implement automation, but were struggling with this. So this is something we put together to just help you present automation at the benefits of automation at different levels. So for the software developer, by having automation in place and detecting those defects on a daily basis or even multiple times a day, the developers are going to have less time fixing defects and have more time to spend with new technology and new features. For us QEs, it's going to be repeatable, reportable testing, and our tests are going to serve as documentation so that we have a documented suite of all the tests, for the application. For the VP of app development, when we are finding defects early and often, it's going to reduce the number of defects found in production, and it's going to give greater confidence in the releases. But at the C levels, it really comes into more of a financial picture. So for the CTO, this automation can greatly reduce operational costs and also allow us to release software more often, which means if we're releasing more often and we're having smaller releases, it means we're introducing less and less risk when we release software. For the CEO, the automation documentation or the automation suite, so let's say we have something like Cypress or Selenium, that suite of tests becomes not only documentation of how the application is supposed to perform, but it also becomes intellectual property as well, and something that the company can hold on to, and something that can be passed along from QA to QA or developer to developer. And so that knowledge of the application is not getting lost when somebody leaves. The next person can come and pick it up and understand the tests and what the tool is trying to test or how the application is supposed to perform, which then of course minimizes the risk with personnel. Okay, so you may have seen this before, but this is known as the testing pyramid with regards to what type of test you're trying to automate. So unit tests, typically, you want to have a large percentage of code coverage, writing your unit tests, and your UI tests, because unit tests are going to be, smaller, cheaper to implement. You're doing them at the code level as you're developing. Meanwhile, your UI tests through, one of those code-based or software-based automation tools are going to be more in depth, take more time, some more expensive to write over time, and then will take more time to run the suites as well. So there's some trade-offs there, but there's also a healthy balance of the number of unit tests, integration tests, and UI tests. Okay. So what I talked about earlier with the feedback loop, when we're doing agile development with test automation, we are closing the defect feedback loop, meaning that we are greatly reducing the time that it takes to discover a defect. So when we say long, medium, short iterations, so a long iteration, let's say, we're doing a project where we just develop for a couple months and then we do 2 weeks worth of testing, we might do some checks here and there in terms of smoke testing, But in terms of running that whole test suite, you're probably not going to have the time to do that throughout the development cycle. So by the time you actually get to your testing, it could be a couple months before you discover a defect that occurred during development. Whereas, let's say you do more agile development, or Scrum, and you do a 2-week sprint, and then you do some in-depth testing, you still may not discover those defects for 2 weeks, versus really implementing test automation in a DevOps fashion and running your regression suite on a nightly basis, or even with code commit. And let's say that's a 50, 100, 200 test suite. You're going to be able to get those results on a daily basis and greatly reduce that feedback loop in terms of discovering defects. And of course, that saves your company money as well, because the cost of discovering and fixing a defect in production is much greater than fixing that defect in the development environment. And with this, I'm gonna hand this off to, or am I covering this one, Brian, or I forget, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're covering this one. Mm-hmm.
I forget, I apologize for that. Okay, so this is our test automation ecosystem, and this is what I mentioned in the beginning, our holistic approach to test automation at WWT. So when we think about test automation and building out a large test suite, it's one thing to write quality tests with quality code and also test the right things. But there's a lot more things that we consider than just the test suite itself. So we want to make sure we look at, the infrastructure of the test. We want to make sure that, there is sufficient testing environments and that those environments are as production-like as possible. We want to make sure that, we have a solid deployment pipeline in place. We also want to look at data. So do we have sufficient data? Because often lower level environments are lacking the amount of data needed. And also, is that data secure? So we want to make sure that when we're copying data from prod to lower level environments, that we are, scrubbing that data so there's no real data, real production data for users in those lower level environments. We also want to look at governance as well. So is there any approvals required? What kind of training is required? I think often a lot of larger companies that have IT departments, they require approvals for either the tool itself or maybe for libraries or upgrading. So we have to look into that. And then really just looking holistically at, the type of people that you have. Are they able to understand the tool and they can get trained easily? How you can scale this across different users and departments in your organization, and also because you could be spending a lot, what's your return on investment? And really that's where WWT's unique approach to automation comes in. So, even though it looks like there's a lot to consider when you look at all the things I just mentioned, the infrastructure, the test suite, the data, the governance, what we do is we break down that approach into more of an agile or incremental fashion. So just like with software development, where we want to do, incremental delivery, taking small chunks or units at a time, we want to do the same thing with test automation. So what that looks like is, let's say we just, create one simple test with a simple login that maybe doesn't even have, all the configuration and page objects set up yet, but let's just create a simple test with a simple login on a local machine and maybe not even flesh out the pipeline yet. And let's just see if that test passes. Let's see how it handles that, that development or staging environment. And we're going to start detecting things earlier than if we built out that whole suite and took all that time and then started finding those issues later. And David will, get into a case study for that in the future or in the latter part of the presentation. So this is our more incremental or value-based approach to test automation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to explore the universe of test automation more.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. So I want to talk a bit here about some of the tooling and kind of how we evaluate that tooling. And I'm going to focus on functional and performance testing here. As you'll see, we've got those two named systems here. And in the upper right, we've got a handful of the unnamed systems, and those are designed to represent other types of testing like internationalization, security, or accessibility testing. So focusing on the functional and performance, as this is usually what we see when working with our customers, is these types. So for functional testing, we're going to talk about Michael and David and a couple of our QA teammates came up with a really good way to categorize the types of tools that we use, and that being click and record, automation as code, and then the AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. So go ahead, Michael, next slide here. Thank you. So as we start working with clients and we start kind of doing some of that discovery, we can use some of the questions we ask, as well as these pros and cons, to better determine where we're using the right tool for the job. Because as Michael mentioned, one of the things that we really enjoy about WWT is that we are tool agnostic. So we can kind of meet the client where they're at, or we can help make those suggestions based on what we come up with. And so starting with click and record here, oftentimes with these are a really good gateway. They can be, oftentimes there's a really nice UI to this, and you're able to navigate to your application and kind of step through it using this tool, and it's going to go ahead and record your steps as you're going through it. And what makes that really nice is that oftentimes you don't need as technical of a staff to do it. So it can be, maybe some of your business team members can run through the test themselves. They understand how the application works, the different paths that need to be tested. So they can kind of step through the application as a user would, and have this tool running and start creating those tests in that tool. So they do have a couple drawbacks, though. Sometimes they can be fairly maintenance heavy. And what we mean by that is certain tools, not all of them, but some of these click and record tools, because they have that nice UI to them, changing certain things about a test can be a little bit more difficult. If you have a simple login flow, for example, maybe you go ahead and you record that login flow, you've got that all set up, you've got the elements that you need to interact with, but down the line, something changes. There's a business need that needs to change. Sometimes you may not be able to just swap out an element within that test. You may need to re-record the entire test. So that's where it can get a bit heavier with the maintenance on those. And then when it comes to the support and licensing on these, oftentimes these license fees are fairly high. The product itself is fairly robust, and again, it's got a nice UI layer, and that licensing there can it can just be expensive for your team to kind of adopt and get licenses for it. And with the support network, oftentimes you're relying on maybe a support package you purchased with the company, or you're relying on a forum or some internal support from that company. Whereas with some of these other tools, you might get access to, like Stack Overflow or some Medium articles, and have better access to support that way. And then taking a look at automation as code. So this is really where we at WWT, this is kind of our strongest focus. This is what most of our QEs and QAs are up on. And oftentimes, if we can use an automation as code tool, we'll go ahead and do that. So as Michael mentioned, something like Cypress or Test Cafe, we'll try to use one of these. Them being open source, we get a little bit more control over some of what we do. And as it says here, kind of best current practice. Like I said, this is where we really like to spend our time. But again, since you're writing it as code, it does require a bit more of a technical staff to write some of these tests, to carry out some of this testing. Oftentimes at WWT, as Michael mentioned, we're working very closely with developers. So we have the benefit of, depending on the tool we pick, or we can pick a tool that aligns with the the tech stack that the application itself is built in, so we can work with our developers that way. But then that does require a bit more technical know-how. And because you're writing code, these are just as susceptible to tech debt. So you might write a code, or write a test, it's flaky. You're going to have to go in and kind of evaluate that, maybe add it as a card, and then address it later, figure out why it's flaky. So they do incur that tech debt. And then oftentimes, because most of these tools are in that open source realm, you're not often getting support from the company itself. And this can be difficult sometimes for customers to adopt, because sometimes they want to be able to point the finger if something goes wrong. So you're often not getting support from the company itself unless you purchase a option within that tool that gives you some support. So you're relying much more heavily on the community, like Stack Overflow or Medium articles. And finally here, looking at AI ML. So these are very new, very cutting edge, kind of bleeding edge testing tools. And they have a lot of promises. They offer a lot, or they hope to do a lot. And some of the big parts of them, this self-healing is a really neat aspect of them, in the sense that as it starts learning your tests, it starts learning about the different elements. And if certain elements in your test change, the tool itself can start making suggestions or start self-healing, and saying, okay, this button used to be here. I see that it's moved, but it performs the same action. So I'm going to assume this is, or I'm going to make a decision that this is what needs to occur. So I'm going to just go ahead and continue where I was. So that self-healing is a really cool aspect. And then discovering new tests is also a really neat aspect of these, in the sense that as it runs through your application, some of these have an option where you can let it kind of just spider through your application, and it'll just start moving through your application, and then start developing tests based on different areas that are hit. So it'll start generating new tests maybe you didn't think of, or some that it feels are user paths that are good for testing. And so with these, you are relying a lot heavier on some enhanced analytics, because you want to get to a point where with this AI ML, you're maybe not touching your tests as much. The tests are just running, they're learning new things, they're healing on their own. So you're relying more on that spitting back data to see what changed or what new tests were found. And so with all of this, it is, because they're so new, they're fairly expensive. A lot of the licensing on these are very expensive, and they can be very time intensive to set up. As I said, the idea behind them is they're going to start learning your application, start learning different things about it, and then start making suggestions, or start kind of just carrying it out on its own. So you need to give it some time to run through your application and get to know it. And since they are still in their infancy, the support for them that great as well. You may be relying much heavier on the company that offers the tool itself. So that's going to be something you're going to deal with as well. And then Michael, really quick here, I know you were recently at Star West and you met some of the vendors that develop some of these AI ML tools. And was there anything that I don't know if you had a chance to talk to them, but was there anything that they may have talked about that kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I had from Star West, which is one of the which Yusuf and I were both attended and presented at in October, looking at the exhibition hall with lots of companies that did software-based test automation tools, and a lot that claim that they were using AI. As we were talking to some of the not AI experts from their companies, but AI experts who really had been researching and even presenting at the conference, they were really saying that very few of these tools really use true AI. Like they may use it as a catchphrase or tag word or selling point, but there's very few tools out there that are actually implementing true AI. So I thought that was pretty eye-opening and just something to be careful about. I think that could change in the future, but right now I feel like it's more of a catchphrase than true functionality in some of these tools.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll see a couple examples of these. We'll have a couple examples of what these tools look like in just a moment here. So next slide.
And I was gonna say real quick, maybe some of the
Okay.
examples, right? Like click and record. So, Smart Bear Test Complete is an example.
Mhm.
Cafe is another one, even though you can do code-based automation and click and record separately on Test Cafe, and some of the AI tools like, Mabel we're going to get into, and Test IM, which Tricentis just bought. And there's some other ones, many other ones for all these different categories as well.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so shifting focus here a bit, bringing that performance testing system to the foreground here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the important aspects of performance testing, some of the tooling, as well as some things to keep in mind to have successful performance tests. So we've got the APM, or application performance monitoring tool. We've got the mock client tool. And then we'll talk a bit about environment parity and why that's crucial. Cool. Next slide. All right, so going through the breakdown here of the tools, and again, your mock clients here, this is going to be what you need to kind of mimic that load on your system. So that's either going to be, it's users. You're going to ramp this up, see how many users you can throw at your system at once. And a lot of times these tools will have the built-in test runner with them. So you can do that soak testing or that load testing, or even spike testing with these tools. And the whole idea with these mock clients is to get that, kind of simulate an artificial load on your system that can hopefully, or that will mirror what a busy or high traffic would look like for you. There are a handful of options. There's open source and proprietary. A couple of the examples here being JMeter, Gatling, and Load Runner. And then taking a look at environment parity. So this is absolutely crucial when carrying out performance tests. And I feel like this can also be a really big hurdle for some companies. But environment parity, what we mean by that is ensuring that when you're doing these tests, you have an environment that is close to as production as possible, a replication of production. And reason being is that when you're running these tests, you're not going to have confidence in any of the results that come out of it if you're hitting a system that isn't identical to production. The test results are gonna give you results that just won't match real life. So this is potentially, like, you don't want to be testing against a subset of data. You're going to want to be testing both data as well as hardware, however your application is that currently exists in production. So you're going to want to make sure that those match production, so you are confident in the results that come from those tests. And as I stated, this can be really difficult for some companies to do, and it can be difficult with the cost and the amount of time that it takes. So potentially replicating, creating that hardware, having that hardware, and having a production-like environment is essentially two production environments you're paying for. And sometimes if you need to do like a cut of data over, that can take some time. So it's absolutely crucial to have that environment parity to make sure your tests your results are accurate. And then while these tests are running, you've got your APM, and not necessarily just while they're running, but also while your application is just running day to day. The application performance monitoring tool is going to be crucial in measuring how the system is behaving while those tests are running, or while users are just navigating through your app. So what you can get is a really deep understanding and see things like API endpoints, which endpoints are being hit at which time, what's the response times, both from those endpoints, even database transactions you could see if they're set up correctly. So the APM is crucial in ensuring that you're seeing how your system behaves while those tests are running, but also while you just have just your general users going through it. So some examples of this tool here, we have AppDynamics, New Relic, and Dynatrace. Awesome. So
Brian, is time check. We may want to go through these a little faster than.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So taking a look here, so going through this, I'm going to go through an automation as code example. Just a quick synopsis of what this test is. It's going to use Sauce Labs. Sauce Labs has a test website. It's a fake storefront. So what we're going to do in each of these examples is sign in, go to that product page, and then we're going to go ahead and sort the items on that page from low to high and verify that we see the price $7.99. So automation is code example using Cypress. This is what it looks like here in the code. You'll see at the top, line 3, we're getting our setup or labeling what our test is going to be. And then we're doing some standard login here. We're then doing using a page object model that we have declared on line 1, and we're going to verify that the product's header is correct. And then on line 9 is the test itself here, where we're going to actually log in and then sort those products. Perfect. And then so if you're not familiar with Cypress, when you run your tests, this is kind of the startup screen you see. This goes ahead and lets you choose your browser that you want to start testing in. And so for this test, we're just going to choose Chrome. Cool. And then here, what we have, if you're not familiar with Cypress, what you see on the left-hand side in that dark square, that is the test runner that's running on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you're going to have a view of your application as it's running through it. So as the test is running, you're going to be able to follow it on the left-hand side here. And so one of the really nice benefits of Cypress is their test runner. It's really nice to see how your test goes through, and as it hits assertions and certain steps in your test, you can follow along not only in the steps but in the application itself as well.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, when we set up this test, we actually had the same test 3 times. One was in Firefox, one was in Chrome, and one was in Chrome and in Firefox. So you can see how when Brian chose Chrome, it skipped the Firefox one, which was first, then did Chrome in the second, and then the third one had Chrome and Firefox, but only ran in Chrome because you can only run one at a time, one browser at a time.
All right, so next here, click and record example being Tricentis Tosca. Personally, I'm spending a lot of time in this tool right now. I'm working with a client who's heavily invested with Tosca. So we're going through and building this out, but doing the same test. This is kind of what it's going to look like in a click and record tool that's with, like I said, they often have a really nice UI with them. So the recorder for Tosca is kind of hard to show. It doesn't really pop up anything, but the idea is that you start the recorder and you step through that flow in your application. And in that box in the bottom left there, you'll see it says recorded modules. And as you step through the application, it starts generating these modules for you. And a module can be seen as a page or a certain action in your application. So you'll see, for example, that Swag Labs login page, it captured, as I stepped through it, it captured the username, the password, and then the login. So it captured those elements for me on that specific page. And then what I can do is drag those into my test, and I can start filling those out with values. I can start adding data to those tests. So Tosca has this record feature. They also have the ability to kind of create your test from scratch. So if you didn't want to record and scan your own modules, you can do that. But the click and record example for them is really robust. And then as your tests are running, right along the bottom there, they give you that nice little time remaining and how long your tests have been running for, and green, red, whether the test passed or failed. Awesome. And last example we have here, as we said, we're going to talk about Mabel a little bit. This is the AI tool. And everything with Mabel starts with their Mabel trainer, and it's their recorder, their test recorder. And as you go through, you'll see step 1 there, it was added by Mabel. So as you target the window where you're going to go to run your tests, it's kind of making some suggestions or things that it's going to add for you. And then you'll just navigate through your application as you would. And steps 3 through 8 here are kind of that sign in. So we're going to sign in, and then we're going to select that low to high filter, and we're going to choose that, and we should see the items rearrange. And this really interesting part is when you click on, for example, step 9, all we did was click on that $7.99. And what it comes up with, it says, hey, I think that you want to assert that the inner text of this element is going to be $7.99. That's my suggestion, or that's what I think you're trying to do. But you'll notice that little view criteria label right there to the bottom right. And if you go ahead and go to the next page here, Michael, you'll see that when you click on that, you get some suggestions. So Mabel itself said, you know what, I think this is what you want to do. But if for some reason you decided that you wanted to change that up, if you wanted to say it's the class or its position is first, you can do that. So you can still take control and help guide Mabel in how it's going to go ahead and start identifying or doing those verifications. So next here, Michael, and then running your tests with Mabel. So you can do a local run, does require like another program to be on your computer, or you can use their cloud run, which will go ahead and run those on their servers. And so you can choose desktop or mobile. You'll see on the right-hand side here, we've wanted to run an ad hoc run of our tests. You can choose your browser, one or more of them, and then you give it the URL and you can start those runs. And that cloud run is a queue system. So we're on the free tier. We were on the free tier when we were doing this. So it's a queue system. You fire it off, it goes up. And if it can run all three of your tests in each browser, it will. Otherwise, it'll say I can run Chrome. I'm going to need to wait my turn to run Edge and then Firefox. So that's kind of what Mabel looks like there. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to David here to talk a little bit about one of our engagements.
Yeah, I will say real quick on Mabel, like when we say AI is still in its infancy, whether it's using, true AI or not, it'll give you suggestions for like, hey, we think this is your login process and give it to you as a function. But I know when I had, spiked with it, it had like half the steps in there completely wrong. So I think it's, when we say they're still in their infancy, I think that's a very true statement. So.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Michael. So I'm going to dive real quick into a healthcare nonprofit we work with and kind of tie this all up together in a bunch of different things, because the big takeaway here is to start automating and you'll find out what you're lacking, what you need. Like, it's not just write the tests. And it doesn't really matter where you start. It's the uncovering the process. Michael, could you go to the next slide? So this is the return of what we affectionately call the onion. That's our automation testing environment. And we have just the data section highlighted here. So our first discovery with them is unsanitized production data in the test environment. And for a healthcare provider, that's a big shock of, whoa, what now? So our first thing was going through and being like, look, you need to take care of your data. We can help you take care of your data, but we need testing data that's true testing data and is accessible by people who are going to be testing. We don't want people to have security permissions to see prod data if they're just running tests. So that was our first thing. And then we start writing our test and selector rows. I know there's always a fight between giving IDs or not to things on web pages. There's arguments that makes things slower, or, well, then it's going to be used for business data or stuff. IDs are just still the best practice to find CSS and HTML elements fast. And we couldn't do it easily, or even at least two cases where we just couldn't do it without the ID. Like, they were buried so deep, we needed the ID to be able to select them. And then moving on, we had the data set up. We had selectors in place. And then our tests were flaky. Why? It took a long discovery process to figure out, well, our test account didn't have a profile picture. All the other accounts, most of the prod accounts had a profile picture. But watching the network traffic, watching how things moved and what loaded, without this profile pic, sometimes only half the page loaded, sometimes the page just hung and didn't load completely. So there was a discussion on, should we make the profile picture required? Should we just give one to test and move on with life, knowing that that bug's out there for someone doesn't have one in prod? So just discovering something like this, you would never find it manually testing. It would be like, oh, it hung, la, 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 and it would never hang again for the next 2 weeks. But since we were doing so many automated tests per day, it became a big deal. Then we had real fun, the authentication takeover. Try saying that 6 times fast. But so we're big proponents of Cypress, but we're also agnostic. We don't care what tool we use. So when we went to use username and password, Cypress at the time couldn't flip to another site, confirm the login, and flip back to your original site. It couldn't do the authentication through Azure DevOps. That has since been fixed, but at the time it was like, we just can't do it. Cypress says no. So we took all our tests that we wrote in Cypress and we went to Selenium. It was what we needed to do because the tool we chose couldn't get past this roadblock on purpose by design. So once again, as I said, it doesn't matter what you start with, you'll learn along the way and you can adjust. Moving into the lack of insight. So one of the other big gotchas we had in the whole thing was they didn't know how their site was being used. We didn't know how their site was being used. So we needed to figure that out. We needed to figure out how navigation goes through, what most people are hitting it for, where people bail from the site. So we can actually make good flows representing the normal user experience. So the client had no idea. We had to set up a feedback link to get feedback from their clients, which surprisingly, we got really good feedback from that link. It doesn't always work that way, but people will complain when things go wrong, so yay. We also got user experience workshops to not only have people come in and use it, but to watch people use it. So we can see the things they're not telling us. And then a lot of analytics to look for hotspots and flows and bailouts and just all that data that we could then feed not only into our automation UI tests, but into our performance tests. Like now we know how big of a spike we get on Sunday afternoon, and we can write a performance test around it. Well, before we didn't. So all this goes together and is just discovery you make along the way. Next slide.
I'm just going to bring something real quick to slide 4. So, with the issue where we couldn't get past the Azure redirect here is that, Cypress brings the browser into their test runner, which is really keeping it inside an iframe, versus Selenium, which actually behaves more like a native browser, which is why it was able to get past the redirect and do the authentication. And Microsoft Playwright, which is becoming more and more popular, behaves more like Selenium in that fashion. But Cypress 12 now solves the problem, whereas it failed in the earlier versions, of Cypress with this.
Yeah, you have to specifically call out you're going to a website, but you can do it now. So how long does this take us? Because what we're talking about seems like a whole lot of effort. Just getting people excited by test automation, we have a workshop that's 1 to 2 days. It's yay automation. But sitting down and assessing and being like, hey, you need to clean up your data. You need to look into these tools. What tools do you support internally now? That's usually 1 to 3 months of concentrated work, which sounds like a lot. But at the end, you get working tests. For 6 to 12 months, we get you a whole working test suite. So not a lot of time for the payout, for how much it frees people up. But, we've been doing this for a long time. And this is just what it averages out to. Everything's different. But I'm hoping to give you some hope that it's not a 6-year-long process. And then questions. I saw some in chat, but let me get chat open here.
Yeah, taking a look here, I see one from Sanjay, which I think is a good question. It's I think it came up right around when I was talking about the performance testing and talking about making sure that you have that environment parity to ensure your results are accurate. And the question is there any AI tool for analyzing the results? And there may be tools to analyze the results, but I think the accuracy, a lot of the accuracy of your test is going to be potentially based on some of your business needs, and that discussion with your business team and understanding what you expect your application to handle. So I think that I think there's a big part of that. You can definitely use tools to analyze the data and take action on it, but understanding from a business perspective of is the response time we're seeing good? Are we handling enough users? I think that's a lot of that's going to fall back onto your business needs and understanding data that you may have about your current user count and things like that. So I'm not sure if there's a tool that can go through and make those suggestions for you. Maybe you can feed it some business needs and it'll spit out a recommendation. But I think that overall you're going to want to work with your business team to understand that the results you're seeing are accurate for what you expect.
Yeah, I'm just throwing out a tool there that was suggested to me at the Star West conference, dev-tools.ai. That'll help bring AI like into your Cypress or Selenium type tests. So I can't say I personally spiked with it, but that was a suggestion from someone who did an AI presentation coming out of the conference.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a little bit of what Brian said, but just highlight it. In short, to know it's right, you have to have people interacting with it daily. So, mind if I jump to Jason's question about, in your opinion, Cypress became big time so quickly?
Yeah, go for it.
I think that is technically the next question. We had a lot of cheering from Josh, and I appreciate that. So the short answer is Selenium was old in the tooth. Selenium had been around forever, and it was showing its age. And the world was hungry for a new contender in this space. We've seen a lot of flash in the pan things that were too complex for their own good. Cypress basically knew its target audience was not developers, but also knew that developers had to be on board. So it made a very simple, friendly GUI that looks easy and is easy to understand by anyone, with a combination of deep technical command line prompts. That to me is what made it take off so fast. And it doesn't hurt that it's, JavaScript based, so which is very popular.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did a presentation on Cypress versus Selenium at Star West, and yeah, and I think beyond what David said, I think the fact that the code writing is a little bit easier in terms of using pre-built commands from their library to interact with text buttons much more easily. The fact that the web application itself loads much faster in Cypress versus in Selenium. You have to wait for it to build, and you have to wait for the engine to go. And so there's a lot more behind the scenes there. So it's the loading and just the scripts in general, let alone the flakiness. But yeah, there's a lot of benefits with Cypress, but I was saying Playwright too, because it seems like Playwright has a lot of the speed and more stability with the tests, but then it has that more native browser-like interaction like Selenium does, where that's one of the things that hinders Cypress. So Playwright's a really good option too. Brian, I don't know if you want to add or.
Yeah, no, agreeing with all that. And then I think its adoption was really quick as well, because it lets you use a lot of what you may have been used to in the JavaScript world of like Mocha and Chai. So it kind of builds in those assertions that you're used to. making it even easier to pick up and use. So I think that was a big part of it gaining popularity so quickly as well.
Yeah, I think Cypress also lets you have the diagnosis of seeing the browser next to your test steps together, and then being able to do that step-by-step diagnosis, built in, versus Selenium, you might have to add a third-party tool, to have something like that. So, were there other questions you were monitoring, Brian or David?
Josh has one of what were the various reporting implements your clients have asked or you have gave based on their need? And I'm going to have to pass on that one, I think.
Yeah, Michael, do you want to take a swing at answering that one?
Yeah, no, Josh, can you provide more clarity maybe in terms of like how we report test results, or how we report how the the tool's performing? Or if you have any more clarity on the question.
Yeah, he just replied with the report with the test result.
Yeah, so I think with the test results themselves, I wouldn't say we've had anything that's very strict. I think as long as, I think the basis is, as long as, because basically when we're doing this, we're basically training and handing this over. Like that's the big goal when we do mentoring of QAs or developers and test automation. The goal is to hand it over and us not be doing it forever, making them sufficient and or proficient in in test automation, not just the test writing, but the overseeing the maintenance, overseeing the reporting, et cetera. So I wouldn't say we've had like strict requirements. I think it's just something that can be viewed and organized easily in terms of the results, and being able to identify what's failing, being able to maybe identify trends, right? Are we seeing more failures over the past week? Are we seeing the same test fail over and over? So I feel like as long as there's that clarity there, that I don't think it matters necessarily what tool or how it's being presented, but I just think those simple things to make the the maintenance easier, because I feel like the biggest key to successful automation is test maintenance, right? So having people looking at those results every day, analyzing whether it's a true bug or a fluke with the test or an environment thing, and then making those fixes, because you could put a huge investment in this, and if you don't keep up with it and you get used to failures, just saying, oh well, we know about that failure, or those failures start adding up and you don't do anything with it, then quickly it loses its efficiency and its stability. And yeah, we've seen that time and time again where automation just kind of dies because people don't keep up with it. So results are important, but I think as long as it's something that the maintainers can easily easily interact with, and I don't think there's a set standard or requirements.
Yeah, I see Josh's follow-up on some people would want emails or notifications. Honestly, I build it into the pipeline, even if it's manual. I have to press the button in the pipeline to start the automation test. I try really hard to build it into the pipeline, and then almost all the pipelines integrate with Slack or email or something, and I just have those results emailed off. That's what I do.
Yeah, and we have a large Cypress suite for our internal web application or public-facing web application, and using using a third-party npm package for reporting. We do get email notifications sent to X number of QAs and some management as well, and those things are very easy to configure. I think it's a Mocha reporter, one of the npm packages, so it's like free, it's easy to configure, and then you get visibility on it, because you're right, Josh. I mean, you want a way to for everyone to to see that and not forget about it on, on a daily basis. So, so yes, I think, emails, Slack notifications, et cetera, those things are, are very important and things that, we use or we've, suggested before.
And I think Sanjay's question's the last one here is tips to reduce test execution time. If you don't have befores and afters, start using befores to set up your test data. You would be amazed. One of my coworkers had a test that took 1 hour and 27 minutes to run, and she cut it down to 6 minutes. Just doing all the setup at the start.
Yeah, and I would say login as well. So, because for example, like one of our test suites that I'm mentioning that we have internally that I helped out with for a while, we had three different test users in terms of like different types of user profiles. So we would make sure that we could log in with all three at different points in the test cycle and, generate cookies, but then we could use those cookies to, do the authentication, but avoid the login process for many of the other tests. So like all three of those users might log in once and have, X number of tests with that user. But then once we do the login, we have those cookies, written in red for the remaining tests for that user. So you avoid that time logging in for each single, test file. And so that saves a lot of time as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, best practices you can put into place to, bring down that runtime for the whole suite.
I think this goes into our next question from, I'm gonna guess Bajoy, but I am horrible with names, so I apologize in advance. How do you avoid creating a lot of data using test automation? So I think these two questions actually are asking something that's important, and we briefly blew by, is the testing pyramid. You need unit tests and integration tests and UI tests, and they're all automation. And you need that whole interlocking framework to work together. Because if you're doing a lot of negative test casing and stuff up at the UI level, it's going to slow everything down. It's going to be painful. A lot of that needs to be pushed down as much as possible to go through fast. But one way or the other, you're just going to end up making test data. So you either need to make test data that is going to be out there and it's usable until someone comes along and destroys it, and then you have to remake it. It happens. Or you need to clean up your data after every single run. And that's just time and having the ability to go in and delete it and clean it up. But
Yeah.
Go, Brian.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah. Just from experience, I've written some tests where we clean up with a direct API call. And so we have access there and we can clear out different parts of the application just using some API calls, or I've even had it step through and just do some cleanup in the UI, runs through and deletes everything we created. So yeah, creating data is definitely going to be part of your tests, and then making sure that in your teardown, you're cleaning up any data that shouldn't be there at the end of the test, or to make sure that your next tests aren't conflicting with any of that data.
And the final question. Oh, go, Brian. Oh, go, Michael. Sorry. Whew.
I say like Jenkins, you can create Jenkins runs as well to, maybe reset data. And that's not really a best practice. I'd say like the best practice really is to, like set up a user right and delete the user at the end of the test. But, I've seen times where, you may just rely on a set of data. And if you do, then I think it's important to, refresh that data or reset that data either after or at the beginning of a new run, because it does two things. It resets the data that the tests expect, but then it, deletes any additional data created. But the best practice really would be to, delete, create fresh, users or data when you start a run, and then, delete that at, at the end of a run or end of a test. But yes, David, your last question.
Yeah. Jason's curious if it's Magic the Gathering cards behind me, and yes, there are some Magic the Gathering cards behind me. So, I have 4 bookshelves like this full of board games. So
Awesome, awesome. All right, guys, thank you for the great presentation. Michael, David, and Brian, thank you so much, guys. And I believe we're like 6 minutes past from our time, and I apologize. So is there any contact points, guys, if our members try to reach out to you directly or get clarified some of the questions they have? So can they reach out to you guys through LinkedIn profile? Or is there the best way to reach out to you guys to communicate?
I think LinkedIn is perfect.
LinkedIn works, yep.
Awesome.
LinkedIn works.
Awesome. Please, guys, check out our speakers' LinkedIn profile to get to know more about their work and directly communicate with them if you have any questions. And on my side, I would like to thank you, thank our speakers again for your time and expertise. And on behalf of Houston Software Quality Engineering Group and our presenter, I would like to thank everyone as well for joining us and wish you enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thank you. And please check out our YouTube channel if you guys wanted to rewatch this session. So we'll be posting it really soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.